The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
One sign that a country might be preparing to attack another country is that they ban travel there and tell all of their citizens to leave that country. And that's exactly what the United States is now doing with North Korea. The U.S. State Department announced yesterday that travel to North Korea will be banned starting September 1st. And the State Department is also telling Americans who are already there or might be there later this month that they must leave before September 1st. If you are a U.S. citizen who wishes to travel to North Korea after September 1st, you'd have to obtain a special validation for your passport, which would be granted only in limited circumstances. There's basically 4 categories of travel that would be allowed by the State Department after September 1st. Journalists, which is a common one, American or international Red Cross workers on official business for the Red Cross, other aid workers as sort of determined by the State Department, or anyone else whose trip is in the national interest. I don't know if that would mean Dennis Rodman would be allowed to go. I don't know if his trips are in the national interest. Drunkenly defecating in Pyongyang hotels. I'm not sure if that serves national interests or not, but that's sort of a question for a different day. Sort of surprisingly, the reaction from a lot of people has been, why would anyone want to go to North Korea anyway? Which is really not the issue here, right? I mean, one, I think it would be fascinating to go to North Korea. That's not really the newsworthy part. I don't think I'd go, I've said before, because my years of criticism of North Korea would probably get me arrested on site as soon as I appear there. But, losing North Korea as a cultural tourism destination is not the major story here. We've been talking about the growing concern that Trump might escalate with North Korea, at least partially out of desperation for his failing presidency. And what explanations could there be other than that for this being a prelude to war, trying to harm the country economically, maybe?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure many Americans will hear this and think, wait, we could have gone to North Korea this whole time. And you could. Now, obviously, there's no North Korean embassy in the U.S., so you'd have to go through China and do some complete package deal. And that's exactly what Otto Warmbier did. And of course, he was eventually jailed in that country and sent back here only in his dying days. And Trump had to respond to that. Now you have the missile test being conducted by North Korea. Those two things combined could really set off Trump, I think.
Trying to harm North Korea economically by taking away tourism dollars does not seem, therefore, like the most likely thing here. Now, sometimes the State Department will tell people, don't go to a particular country because it's not safe there. But that hasn't fundamentally changed in North Korea. It's been relatively dangerous for Americans to travel to North Korea for a while. And there's also an interesting constitutional argument that some people have been making, which is that the State Department doesn't have constitutional authority to restrict the travel of its citizens in other countries, that's not in the Constitution. So it's not a power that the State Department has, that fundamentally North Korea decides who enters North Korea. That may technically be true, but the U.S. can still cause a problem for you when you come back to the U.S. Yes, ultimately North Korea determines whether you're allowed into North Korea, but when you try to come back is where you can end up having a problem. And so my bottom line on this is not necessarily a sign that Trump is going to war with North Korea, but it is certainly much more politically expedient to escalate with North Korea if you can at least argue that you've done everything you can to limit the risk of killing American citizens who might be in North Korea. So I don't know the answer, Pat, fundamentally here, but we've been talking for like 6 to 8 weeks now about how the circumstances are certainly pointing to maybe Trump becoming erratic and wanting to take military action to try to rescue his presidency. And now we hear this about North Korea. I guess what we can agree on maybe is if Trump is not looking towards North Korea for a possible escalation, he's certainly sending all the signals that that's what he's doing.
And all the military experts say that there's no good way to respond to the North Korean crisis. Obviously, I mean, the missiles that they have are hidden. They're in striking range of Japan and South Korea.
Guam.
And obviously you have to consider the fact that the North Korean citizens themselves are victims. I mean, many of them may agree with the actions of Kim Jong-un, but they've been brainwashed for decades, and that's what leads them to that decision.
Multi-generational malnutrition, which has made North Koreans significantly physically smaller than South Koreans. A population that was basically two populations that were the same prior to separation. I was talking to a South Korean friend of mine a couple days ago and said, "Are you following what's going on? You've got a lot of family there." He said, South Korean politics are in such chaos now, particularly with what happened with their former president, that a lot of people are so used to the day-to-day and every other month escalation or possible escalation with North Korea that they're not really thinking about it, which is a pretty interesting thing to hear. We'll be following it. The president's approval rating has been floating between 36 and 40% in most polls for months now. We've been wondering what might push it up, what might pull it down. More importantly, what would the implications be of a further drop in Donald Trump's approval rating? And we may soon find out, because a new Quinnipiac University poll has a new presidency low approval rating across all scientific polls for Donald Trump of 33%, with 61% of Americans disapproving of the job that Donald Trump is doing. It is not just Quinnipiac that is showing record lows. Even Rasmussen, Pat, which always has Trump higher than anybody else, has Trump at 38%, which I think might be lower than Rasmussen ever had Obama during all of Obama's presidency.
And Rasmussen's always the poll that Trump points to, right?
That's right.
To prove that he's doing such a great job. He can't do that anymore.
There's no one better than Rasmussen, Pat. Believe me, folks have been telling me about that all the time. Actually, it was the Mexican president on the phone who told me what a great job Rasmussen polling is doing.
The Boy Scouts.
Gallup at 36%, right? That's within the margin of error of 33% in the Quinnipiac University poll. And the internals of this Quinnipiac poll are even more fascinating. White men, right? That is a core group for Donny Boy. White men are now basically split on whether they approve of the job Trump is doing, 47-48. That is a really important group for Donald Trump. Another key voting group for Trump, white men and women without college degrees. Remember, Trump loves the uneducated. Kind of a weird thing when he said it, but he loves the uneducated, and the uneducated voted for Trump in big numbers. 50-43 uneducated, non-college educated whites disapprove 50-43 of the job that Donald Trump is doing. This is President Trump's lowest approval and highest disapproval number since he was inaugurated. And on this other question, they asked about character traits in this poll. Are you embarrassed or proud about Donald Trump being president? 54% embarrassed, 26% proud. Worst score on any character trait, maybe not surprisingly, is level-headedness. 71% of Americans believe the president is not level-headed. 26% say he is. My interest would be in talking to somebody in that 26% who says, yeah, Trump is level-headed.
I think that makes sense, though, because while Americans may not follow the day-to-day of the Obamacare repeal effort or the Russia scandal, they have a sense of when an administration is just completely incompetent
and off
keeps
the rails,
lying. And I think they can smell that with Trump.
Lying is interesting because honesty was a personality trait that was polled here. 62% of Americans see the president as dishonest, 34% as honest. And also interesting, this is just the best. John McCain, Republican Senator John McCain, is now more popular with Democrats than with Republicans. And presumably it's because of the recent healthcare dust-up. Democrats approve of the job that Republican Senator John McCain is doing, 60-28, while Republicans disapprove of the job John McCain is doing, 49-39. Stunning numbers, Pat.
Well, I mean, the fact that he has brain cancer obviously plays some role in that, too. But I think Democrats think of McCain now as what Republicans used to be, just someone with whom we'd have disagreements.
Yeah.
And now with Trump, it's just completely different. He's off the rails.
It's just completely off the rails insanity, someone you can't even have a realistic conversation with. Last thing on this poll, voters now believe 2-1 that Russia interfered in the election. Republicans don't, right? So voters overall, 63-31 say, yes, Russia interfered. Republicans say 61-30, no, Russia didn't interfere. Republicans are, not surprisingly, the only group that doesn't believe Russia interfered in the election. So what's the implication here? We're now getting into the low 30s, which I've been talking to you about for months. If we see something like 31, never mind an approval rating with a 2 in front of it, right? Other Republicans may start to throw Trump under the bus, and that will open many new doors here. This includes opening doors to Trump being even more erratic and desperate, talking about maybe military action, as we've been talking about with North Korea, or whoever he can find to attack. But it also may make it so that Republicans stop even pretending to defend the actions of this president. Because if you get to steady 31, 30, 29, or 28, and I still believe 28 might be the rock bottom for Trump at some point here, it's no longer clearly in the interests of Republicans in the House and Senate to support what you're doing.
It also is interesting to wonder what would cause Trump's approval ratings to go down even more.
Yeah.
And when we look at this latest dip, I mean, what's happened in the past couple of weeks, there's been all of those firings, right, of Priebus, of Scaramucci, and he's talked about maybe firing Sessions too. The American people won't have that. The other past dip that he had in his presidency was when Comey was fired too.
Right. So the firings and possible firings aren't helping. And I do think that what's been going on with the Affordable Care Act repeal has also not helped. I would say those are the two biggest factors so far. How divorced from reality or ideologically committed to Trump do you have to be to still say, I approve of the job that Trump is doing? And a very interesting note is that in a lot of the polls, the decreased support for Trump isn't coming because more Republicans disapprove. It's that Democratic and independent undecideds who weren't sure if they approved of him in the last couple of months, they are moving to disapprove. But his support from Republicans, it has ticked down a little bit, but it's still relatively steady.
Seems like the people who were giving him a chance gave him their chance and he failed.
The idea, though, I think the important point is the idea that Republican voters are being enlightened about the reality of Trump. That does not appear to be true. How low will it go? I'm still in the 28% camp. Do you have a number, Pat, in mind that you think will be Trump's presidency low?
That's where Bush was, right? And that took 7 years,
To
right
get
around
to 28%. I think you're right.
Around there.
28. So you're around there as well. The question is when? Will it be next week? Will it be next month? Will it be next year? I guess we don't know the answer, but we will see yet another new low, and only 5 points away from what I've been saying will be the presidency low of Trump of 28%. Send me your thoughts. I'm on Twitter at @DPakman. The show is on Twitter at David Pakman Show. Follow both of us there.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Today's new member of the day is Tony Tucker. Tony, thank you. We are mostly funded by viewers and listeners like Tony. You can sign up for membership at davidpakman.com/membership and read about the great member benefits there as well. If you're waiting for a major membership special, we've got one happening on August 12th. Okay. If you want to be notified about that membership special, it is as simple as going to davidpakman.com and signing up for our newsletter. Once you do that, on August 12th, you will be notified about this gigantic membership special that we will be running. Let's talk a little bit about what's going on the David Pakman Show Reddit discussion forum. We have surpassed 4,000 of our viewers and listeners discussing politics with each other. Politics and Pat scandals. Those are the two primary general types of issues discussed on our Reddit discussion forum. You can sign up for free at davidpakman.com/Reddit. Let's look at some interesting conversations I spotted this morning when looking around. One is trivia. Anthony Scaramucci was actually the fourth person as the White House communications director in the Trump administration. Sean Spicer had 2 short stints. That's true. There have been 4 White House communications directors, one of them, Sean Spicer, having that role twice.
Yep.
In only 6 and some portion of months of Donald Trump's presidency. Very interesting.
Sean Spicer was working as the White House press secretary and the communications director at the same time.
That's right.
And he couldn't even handle one of those jobs, so I don't know how he was supposed to handle 2.
No, and also how could Scaramucci handle anything was another question, but that's sort of a different topic. Also from our Reddit discussion forum, interesting post about the aging liberal justices in a conservative Supreme Court. And it's an interesting post about the possible timing of future retiring from the Supreme Court. And really the Supreme Court has proven, Pat, to be one of the most important, or I guess we would say impactful ways that Donald Trump's presidency could steer the future of America.
Yeah, you think about Ginsburg and Breyer getting up there in age. I mean, I don't think they would willingly retire at this point, but you never know. Circumstances could lead them to leaving the court.
Also from our Reddit discussion forum, a post about the importance of gender and gender studies. This is related to my interview on Tuesday. with a Professor Peter Boghossian, who is not a fan of gender studies in schools. He believes that they are taught, those departments are taught by radical ideologues who should be defunded. And there was a very interesting discussion about how gender studies is important in college. Also from our Reddit discussion forum about the Peter Boghossian interview. This is just one example on screen, but there were probably close to 10 different threads about different aspects of our conversation with Peter Boghossian. One of them, this one said, "I thought the full hour was a bit of a miss. Don't get me wrong, the guy is interesting enough for an interview. I just don't think he was worth the full hour interview." Although based on the number of threads about the interview on Reddit, that suggests it was compelling, to say the least.
Yes, and some people loved it. We're changing it up.
Sure, people love it. That's what I'm told by the Prime Minister of Montenegro. That's who told me that one on the phone. Of course, don't ask me for proof that that phone call ever happened. Lastly, from the Reddit discussion forum, a celebration thread about 4,000 subscribers on Reddit. Yeah, this started so small, Pat. I don't know how long ago. And now with the help of moderators and the regular visits by producer Pat and by me and by our intern Brian is all over the Reddit. Everybody's all over Reddit. It has now surpassed 4,000. And that is a nice little online community.
So I can stop making Reddit accounts and subscribing to the subreddit now?
Yeah. You can cancel your 3,850 accounts, which represent almost all of those 4,000 subscribers now that's done. Normally, Donald Trump makes a huge show of everything he signs: new legislation, executive orders, presidential memos, happy Pesach cards to his Jewish friends, whatever, right? Not so for that recently passed Russian sanctions bill. There were questions. What would Trump do about this bill? Is he going to veto it? Well, the optics would be terrible. Will he just not sign it and eventually it will become the law, so he can't be criticized for signing it, but he can't be criticized for obstructing it? Well, ultimately, he signed it very quietly, no press, no cameras, but he also called it unconstitutional. The White House announced the signing of this Russian sanctions bill shortly after 11 a.m. Eastern yesterday, and they said the bill includes, quote, a number of clearly unconstitutional provisions. Wait a second. The guy who was the Constitution candidate willingly signed something into law that is not constitutional? I thought the oath of office that Trump signed off on, agreed to, pledged to uphold when he was inaugurated was to protect and defend the Constitution of the United States. And he willingly signed something that's not constitutional.
Well, I mean, what was he supposed to do? The bill is going to become law one of three ways: whether he signs it, whether he vetoes it and it's overridden, or whether he just ignores it and it becomes law. So at this way, I mean, he can go down kicking and screaming, but at least he doesn't have to face the backlash of looking like he's so clearly tied to Russia.
Well, that's the argument that some were making, which is, listen, Trump doesn't have to agree with it. He's doing the right thing by not obstructing. This is Trump not doing what the bad Democrats did for so long of obstruction by just going along with it. You're telling me that as a constitutional conservative, you support Trump opting not to obstruct by signing something into law that he believes is not constitutional? I think it is the most BS defense of what Donald Trump did here. And John McCain doesn't even agree with Trump. And we talked earlier, John McCain now has a higher approval rating with Democrats than with Republicans, which is, I mean, we are living in bizarro world right now. John McCain said, the framers of our Constitution made the Congress and the president co-equal branches of government. This bill has already proven the wisdom of that choice. And that's, of course, because the bill will prevent Donald Trump from unilaterally easing sanctions that are in place against Russia. These are just very strange times that we're living in here. We have a president choosing not to be obstructionist by signing into law something that he believes violates the Constitution. The defenders of Trump along these lines, though, hey, he's doing the right thing by not obstructing, they're completely irredeemable, right? They will never say they disapprove of the job Trump is doing.
Well, it's also just hard to find where Trump's center is. I mean, what ideologically motivates him? Yeah, it's interesting, too, because the Trump administration wanted to lift Russian sanctions in the first few days that they were in office.
Almost immediately they started working.
So if there was any way out of this, they would have taken that option, but they just couldn't. They were backed into a corner.
Trump's next performance review with Putin is going to be really, I'm sorry, I'm talking about completely equal meeting of two international leaders. I don't know why I would call it a performance review. This is fascinating, what is going on. And it's also clear Russia doesn't like this. They've been very clear that they don't like this and that there well may be consequences to signing the sanctions bill.
Maybe the consequences are a P-tape being released. I don't know.
If that P-tape exists, that has to be someone. There's hackers all over the world doing incredible things that only like Trump doesn't understand, but Baron Trump, he's amazing with computers. Maybe he understands what these hackers are doing. They've got to be close to getting access to that P-tape if it exists, right?
I think so.
Maybe we'll someday find out about that. Congress has appropriated and given $80 million to the State Department, which is, of course, run by Russia-connected friend of Vladimir Putin, Secretary of State Rex Tillerson. The point of that $80 million was to fight Russian propaganda and misinformation. Uh-oh, I could see how this could be a little bit problematic. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson is not interested in using that money. Why doesn't Rex want to use that money? Well, according to a former senior State Department official in a conversation with Politico, Tillerson's spokesman, R.C. Hammond, suggested to Tillerson that actually using the $80 million to counter Russian disinformation and propaganda would make Moscow very angry. This money came from a project last year initially meant to counter ISIS propaganda, and it then expanded to include Russia in light of the meddling in our election. Dating back to February, State Department officials were trying to get Tillerson to use the $60 million from the Pentagon Department of Defense that were allocated, $20 million more that were allotted within the State Department. That's a total of $80 million. Some of this money will straight up expire if it is not transferred soon by Tillerson. This is crazy, Pat. This would be like the Pentagon turning down $80 million to protect the United States right after 9/11. I mean, Russia just attacked the sovereignty and independence of our elections with a very powerful and well-crafted and calculated and executed disinformation and information warfare campaign. And Tillerson's got $80 million available to try to prevent that from happening in the future. And according to his spokesperson, he doesn't want to do it because it might anger the people we're trying supposedly to protect ourselves from.
And it's not like Tillerson is in control of the budget and, bringing these funds out from some other role that the State Department could play.
Yeah.
I mean, Congress is footing the bill here, and he has every decision as to how strongly he wants to execute this plan, right?
Sure.
Whether he wants to really go anti-Russia or just a little bit.
I'm sort of confused because Russia used to be afraid of angering the United States, and now we've got the strong leader in the White House who's going to get things done. And it seems he's the one who's afraid of angering Russia. Times have really changed. And this is only part of the disaster, by the way, that is Tillerson's State Department. There are 200 unfilled senior positions in the State Department. Tillerson also has said that he's not happy about this new Russian sanctions bill, which prevents Trump from preventing new sanctions or from lifting existing sanctions on Russia. If Russia isn't creating this propaganda, as Vladimir Putin claims, then why would this anger the Russian government, right? If you're Russia and you're like, yeah, we're not doing any of this stuff we're accused of doing, then you would kind of not really be affected by the State Department trying to prevent future interference because you're not doing any interference.
And Tillerson has a role in this, being the former CEO of ExxonMobil. I mean, they had a $500 billion deal in the works with Russia.
Oh, yeah.
Sanctions are going to get in the way of that. And remember, Tillerson got that Russian Order of Friendship. I mean, that's going to have to be null and void at this point.
The picture that's over my shoulder here, I believe, is from when Rex Tillerson received the Russian Order of Friendship medal from Vladimir Putin. And he's wearing that medal there and shaking hands with the filthy rich Russian leader. Wow. Quite an interesting picture. This, folks, this man right here, who has just been awarded in this picture a Medal of Friendship by Vladimir Putin, that is our Secretary of State rejecting $80 million to prevent Russia from interfering in future elections. Let's take a break. We'll talk to Terry Kogan, law professor Terry Kogan, next about Donald Trump's attempt to ban transgender military service members.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
I'm thrilled to welcome back to the program Terry Kogan, who's professor of law at the S.J. Quinney College of Law at the University of Utah. Terry, it's so great to talk to you. You know, we've been following these the back and forth catalyzed by a series of 3 tweets by President Trump about his intentions to ban all transgender military service members from service of any kind. And aside from the reality that the Pentagon has said, hey, we don't do things based on tweets, and only when we're actually directed by the president formally to do this are we going to start doing it, I've had some serious both legal and logistical questions about this. And sort of the first one I think might be interesting to talk about is, how do you go about enforcing such a ban as proposed by the president?
Well, the question becomes whether, in fact, one can adopt formal military policy in 3 tweets. The military, the Pentagon, the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Secretary of Defense Mattis, seem to be taking the position that no new policy change has occurred until the military gets direct instructions from the White House. There are a few legal experts who, in interesting articles in the last several days, have argued that a tweet from the president is as forceful as a formal statement. But what is important is that our military appears at this point to be sitting back and waiting and doing nothing to change its policy with respect to transgender people serving in the military until it gets further direction from the White House.
I sort of understand if you're talking about incoming military service members, you know, there is a medical exam that is done, and presumably a doctor could determine if, you know, an enlistee's genitals don't match the gender that was selected, the sex that was selected on their application, for example. But with regard to the, you know, 2,000 to 6,000 transgender individuals that are already in the military, what practical way would there be to enforce such a ban? And would that raise any legal questions?
So let me step back, David, and let's make clear that the traditional vision, which is really the one you're adverting to, that transgender people are those who have undergone sex change operations, in fact, is not the current reality.
Correct.
That, in fact, there are some transgender people, previously called transsexuals, who have, in fact, undergone major surgery to align their bodies with their gender identities, which are opposite from that of their birth bodies. But there are many transgender people who choose to deal with their gender identity in different ways, perhaps with just hormones, or some with no hormones, perhaps with just bodily presentation. So the idea that you could do a medical exam and discover who is transgender, in fact, is not the case. So let's start off with that. Good. Secondly, and this is the thrust, I think, the importance of your question. In fact, based on a study done by the Williams Institute, the estimate that the Williams Institute at UCLA came up with is that there currently are about 15,000 transgender people working for the military, 6,000 of whom are in active duty, which accords with the number you came up with, which really came from the RAND Corporation.
Correct.
And the question becomes, what do you do with all of these people? Do you basically kick them out? As a number of people have pointed out, if the quote, tremendous medical cost that the president referred to is $6 to $8 million, the cost of replacing 15,000 workers for the military is massively greater than the $6,000 to $8,000 that it is costing, estimated, for transgender medical treatment at the moment.
That's fascinating. Now, do we know, Terry, what it's considered to cost to for the full recruitment to active duty of a service member?
Off the top of my head, I do not. What I have read in the last days is everyone agrees that the amount to recruit, the cost to recruit 15,000 new people is many multiples of the $8 billion that it currently is costing for transgender medical treatment.
Fascinating. So that still would also not answer one of the other really important legal questions, which is that of just thinking ahead here, right? Just playing this along to its conclusion. Sure. Honorable versus dishonorable discharge. There have been those who say, no, it would definitely be honorable discharges. But that alone is no panacea. During the times of Don't Ask, Don't Tell, you could be honorably discharged with a reason stated, like, for example, homosexual admission or something like that. And that is still potentially really problematic for people in seeking future employment, et cetera. So this offhanded notion that, don't worry, if we did identify the people and if the solution was we say goodbye, but it's an honorable discharge, that there's no need to worry that that's a great outcome, that's very problematic as well, isn't it?
Let me preface it by saying I am by no means an expert on military law.
Sure.
So this, in terms of the criteria for honorable versus dishonorable discharge, were a bit out of my realm. Having said that, I think that the repercussions of actually dismissing 15,000 transgender people who are serving our military is far broader than just on those 15,000 people. Arguably in contradiction with the suggestions that the White House has made that somehow this is necessary for combat readiness. There is a strong belief that this would be one of the more demoralizing things that the administration could do in terms of military readiness, that the impact on other non-transgender military people who are in units with transgender people who are getting along fine right now would have a terrible, depressing impact on our military. Moreover, given that our generation of millennials, those who are now considering military service, are far more open and accepting of human diversity, the idea that the military dismisses 15,000 people could have a terrific chilling effect, it seems to me, on the ability of the military to recruit in the future.
It seems to me, Terry, that while there are some who like to say, hey, listen, the issue of LGBT rights, it's sort of been resolved. We had the Supreme Court decision saying states can no longer ban same-sex marriage. This is sort of an issue that we've gotten past. It seems like that's a drastic misunderstanding of reality, isn't it? I mean, and I'm not talking just about this latest decree from Donald Trump, but the reality that in many states you can be fired just for your perceived or actual sexual orientation, the increased use of so-called religious freedom to justify discrimination against members of the LGBT community. There's still a long way to go, isn't there?
You are absolutely right, David. That the fact is that at this point, it is still highly contested as a legal matter as to whether Title VII, the Employment Anti-Discrimination Law, protects LGBT people from being fired simply for being LGBT. So one has seen this common quote now that given the current state of the law and given the Supreme Court's marriage equality decision in Obergefell, you can get married on Saturday night to someone of the same sex, and you can be fired on Monday morning for having gotten married on Saturday night. So the law is still very much up in the air. Very importantly, the Seventh Circuit Federal Court of Appeals, which is out of Chicago and one of the most important courts in the country, has recently come out with two very, very important decisions. The first of which said that Title VII, the anti-discrimination law, does cover discrimination against people because of sexual orientation. And then in the decision roughly a month ago, the court determined that under Title IX, which is the law that protects students in public education. In particular, it was a case dealing with another controversial issue involving the right of transgender students to use the restrooms in their schools that accord with their gender identity. The Seventh Circuit determined that discriminating against a transgender student by not allowing them to use the restroom that accords with their gender identity, in fact, is discrimination under Title IX. Very, very important decision for the transgender community. So, though important courts are moving in this direction, the Supreme Court has yet to weigh in directly on this issue. So it's very much up in the air. And the fact that there's marriage equality by no means assures that there's not employment discrimination.
We will continue following what ultimately happens with this proposed transgender military ban from President Trump. We've been speaking with Terry Kogan, professor of law at the S.J. Quinney College of Law at the University of Utah. Terry, always great to talk to you.
Good to talk to you, David.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
So yesterday I told you about 3 lies that Donald Trump appears to have told recently. Obviously, he's told way more than 3 lies, but these are 3 recent lies. Number 1, I consulted with generals before issuing the military ban on transgender service members. That appears to not have been true. Number 2, a Boy Scout official called me and told me how great my speech was. That appears not to have been true. And the Mexican president called me and said I'm doing a great job on immigration. That also appears not to have been true. All 3 are untrue according to the other parties involved. The Pentagon said we don't know of the generals. The Boy Scouts said no one called Trump. Mexico said our president didn't call Trump. Now the White House has admitted to 2 of these being lies. And of course, you have to sort of read between the lines to understand the lies, because White House Press Secretary Sarah Huckabee Sanders confirmed the Boy Scouts liked the speech and says multiple members of the Boy Scout leadership went up to Trump in person after the speech and offered their compliments. That's very different. She's arguing the sentiment Trump expressed is accurate, but it just didn't happen on the phone, right? It's just an issue of venue. But she was asked, well, isn't what the president said a lie then? And she said, I wouldn't say it was a lie. That's a pretty bold accusation. The conversations took place. They simply didn't take place over a phone call. He had them in person.
It's not a bold accusation. I think she's just trying to get defensive here and, you know, explain it away in any way that she can, because what other things could you go to? Either that he misspoke, or that he was having some mental episode, or that the other parties involved are lying. None of those are good.
And exactly the same issue with the Mexican president phone call. Again, Trump said the Mexican president called me. Sanders said, oh no, what Trump meant was last month at the G20 in Germany, he spoke to the Mexican president. And that's when the topic of immigration came up. Understand the argument here, right? Both times Trump alleges that phone calls took place. Both times Sarah Huckabee Sanders says, well, the gist of what Trump said was accurate, but the phone calls didn't actually happen. In order to believe Trump wasn't lying, you have to basically believe he can't distinguish or recall the difference between a phone call and an in-person conversation. If you're trying to argue that the president is competent, lucid, and generally with it, it's not a good idea to say he doesn't know the difference between talking to someone on the phone and talking to someone in person. And again, these lies are demonstrably and provably false. That's the fascinating thing. Trump thinks he's smart enough to get one over on people. He thinks he's such a good liar that he's going to be able to say whatever he wants and people will be impressed rather than figure out that he's telling lies. And he's not that good of a liar.
And it's all the signs of a pathological liar, too, because these are such trivial topics. I mean, what does it matter if your speech to the Boy Scouts was the best ever, or if Peña Nieto thinks that you're doing a great job on Mexican immigration, or if you consulted with your general? It's just like, it's not as if he's trying to pass some policy and trying to deceive the American people in that way.
They're not lies.
End.
They're not lies that help him achieve a particular end. No. That's why it seems so weird. And I mean, remember when he got a letter from the NFL and there was no such letter. Remember when he lied about the weather on Inauguration Day? And it was actually worse. He actually claimed that God held the rain back until the inauguration was over, which is ridiculous. But there's also video of it raining during the inauguration. It's just very, very bizarre. And anytime you have to defend a world leader as a press secretary by saying they're not a liar, they're just either dumb or can't remember anything, then you're already on the defensive. And maybe Trump, what other explanation is there? Like maybe Trump thinks when he talks to someone on the phone, there's a person in the phone, rather than like that's somebody somewhere else calling him. I'm just trying to think outside the box here as to what explanations there could be where this wouldn't be a lie by Trump.
There are a few explanations, but none are good. And I think that's why the communications directors keep going out the door and why he can't hold on to a press secretary now. But Sarah Huckabee Sanders, got to give her credit. She's holding her own there.
If Trump can't tell the difference between talking to someone on the phone and talking to someone in person, isn't it likely he might not be able to tell the difference between the send nuke button and the send tweet button? Like, is that a reasonable concern if he genuinely can't tell the difference?
I mean, sometimes I hit reply all when I just mean to hit reply.
That's happened to all of us.
To me.
I've said it before and I'll say it again. This will be the retroactive defense of the Russia scandal. Listen, it's very clear that this is an unorganized White House. We never could have possibly colluded with Russia. And that's kind of what Jared Kushner's already saying. He said something recently about we couldn't have colluded with Russia because our campaign office was just really, really unorganized. Plead ignorance when nothing else works. In the midst of failure after failure and endless scandals and record low approval ratings, Donald Trump is taking a 17-day vacation to go play golf. Okay. He is going to his golf club in New Jersey starting tomorrow, according to the Associated Press. This is the guy who said he'd barely leave the White House, the guy who slammed Obama not only for taking vacations, but specifically for going golfing. Trump is set to spend more on travel just this year than Obama did in 8 years in office. We are told that part of the reason for this vacation is the White House is replacing its heating and cooling system, so Trump just has to get out of there.
Yeah.
If the president wants to do work in Washington, D.C., they'll find a way for the president to do work in Washington, D.C.
Or go to Camp David, or, I mean, there's many other places you can go and do work. Mar-a-Lago even.
Go to Mar-a-Lago, sure. Meanwhile, Trump has told Republican senators many times, cancel your August vacation and stay until you can get Obamacare repealed. Not happening. Nice idea. Remember Donald Trump, who previously said, quote, I would rarely leave the White House because there's so much work to be done. Quote, I would not be a president who took vacations. I would not be a president who takes time off. Quote, don't take vacations. What's the point? If you're not enjoying your work, you're in the wrong job. I'm starting to think some of those statements might have been lies. And those are the clips that should be played over and over again with the speaker system at Donald Trump's golf clubs. The leaks could get really big. If there's any maybe silver lining in Trump taking a 17-day break away from Washington, D.C., if you are a disaffected Trump aide, Trump staffer, and you are trying to get the word out there that things are really going poorly, there is no better time to start leaking a whole bunch of stuff than when Trump is playing golf 17 days back to back.
Yeah, but I think that kind of assumes that while he's in the White House, he's watching over everything and keeping up to date on what's going on.
No, not literally. No, but when the cat's away, the mice will play. I mean, there certainly might be a feeling of some more freedom, or maybe even just people being angered by, hey, he's taking a 17-day golf vacation after already playing golf almost every single weekend.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, as president, you're never really on vacation. You have that whole apparatus following you, and you can really do work from anywhere. It doesn't have to be the White House.
Well, hold on a second.
That's not the issue here.
Well, that's not the issue. But with Trump, I would argue you're never really not on vacation. He's kind of always, even in the Oval Office, he's just watching Fox News, it seems like. But no, you're getting to what I want to get to, which is if you're thinking golf isn't news, who cares? I don't care about Trump golfing, right? I mean, Obama golfed, George W. Bush, who knows? Everybody golfs, right? The problem is the hypocrisy. He has endlessly berated Barack Obama for playing golf, yet he has played golf way more often than Barack Obama. And most importantly, he's getting nothing done. Taxpayers, you, are paying for these golf trips and for bringing Secret Service all over the place and blah, blah, blah. Trump's gotten nothing done. He has embarrassing public failure after failure. The reputation of the U.S. around the world is immediately in the toilet after President Obama managed to get it back up from the doldrums under George W. Bush. And he's going golfing for 17 days on your dime. That's the issue here.
if work-life balance is important to you, which it's important to all of us, we're going to be going on a vacation soon.
Sure.
You should just find a different job because president of the United States is not one for you.
I think that's the bottom line, right? Like, we did a story last week, which did really well, about Donald Trump Jr. is completely miserable and can't wait for Trump to be out of public office because this is just not going well for them. Every indication that we hear about Trump is he's reclusive, he's miserable, he's watching TV, he's just not doing well whatsoever. Melania can't possibly be happy with what's going on. You think Kushner is pleased that this little public service experiment now has him lawyering up and testifying to Congress about whether he might have committed all sorts of crimes, obstruction, or even up to treason? Why would any of them be happy about this? And Howard Stern, actually, we used to be sort of friendly with Trump. Trump was a regular guest on Howard Stern's show, said that, Trump is not, as far as he knows, isn't talking to his friends anymore, not only Howard Stern, but many others, and that it's very hard to believe that he's enjoying this. Like, why even get into this?
Well, maybe after this vacation, he'll feel refreshed and rejuvenated.
Yeah.
He'll go off the grid, not use Twitter as much, and then come back and say, well, I don't really care about the fake news media anymore. I don't really care about the Democrats. I'm just going to do my own thing.
No more talking about the failing New York Times, maybe. That's the other thing. Will he tweet during his 17-day golf vacation? I think probably.
He will, yeah.
He can't help it, right? He can't help yelling tweets over to whoever's dictating them for him. We've got a voicemail number. That number is 219-2-DAVID-P. You can call it 3 p.m., you can call it 3 a.m. Many of you do call at 3 a.m. I see the timestamps on the voicemails. Let's listen to this voicemail that came in.
I was kind of concerned with your comments on Venezuela and Maduro. You being born in Argentina, you should know how American foreign policy has been toward Guatemala, El Salvador, Honduras. And for you to think that we're not interested in Venezuela's oil after we went into Iraq, but we're interested in Guatemalan bananas and not to be interested in Venezuelan oil is kind of unrealistic.
Okay. So, little fun fact. That voicemail you just heard was played for the audience at nearly double speed.
Huh.
The individual,
I didn't even notice that.
You couldn't even tell. It sounds almost like like it's at normal speed. That it was just a notoriously slow talker, which is perfectly fine. I mean, with peace and love, talk as quickly or slowly
Louis
as you
Gohmert
want.
calling in?
What's that?
Louis Gohmert calling in?
Here's the thing: whether or not American American interests are interested in Venezuelan oil, that is not a defense of the repressive authoritarian regime of now Nicolas Maduro, formerly of Hugo Chavez. And this is where I think many on the left go wrong. And I am not surprised to hear that there are supposed liberals, progressives, who don't like my take on Venezuela, which is that Maduro is an absolute disaster. It is a completely repressive regime. And there's been really good, and a bunch of people, I was impressed, Pat. I mentioned yesterday that there's been some really good investigative reporting from some Argentinian media outlets that I've been watching. And a bunch of people emailed me. They said, can you send me some of the links to the stuff you're talking about? Because I'm interested in seeing how is Venezuela being covered in other countries. Really good investigative reporting in Venezuela at the risk of even arrests and interrogations for many of these journalists. And I followed up with those people and I sent them the stuff that I had been watching. No surprise that some in our audience don't agree with my perspective on Venezuela. Those are usually the same people that don't believe Russia had anything to do with the Trump campaign. Those are often the same people that levy completely irrational, hateful critiques of Israel in the context of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. This is a contingent of the left, and we saw comments on YouTube as well, Pat, criticizing me for my Venezuelan thoughts. On the bonus show today, Cory Booker gets involved in some possible marijuana legalization legislation efforts, I guess we could call them. Luxembourg passes some interesting space law, and this is an issue that has been interesting to me for several years. And Prince Philip has carried out his final official engagement as royalty of England.
Who's he getting married to?
Who? What do you mean?
Engagement.
Oh, engagement. Oh, very, very, very clever. Pat going with puns today. Yeah, very interesting. Anyway, we will talk about all of those stories and more on the bonus show. That one really threw me off there, Pat. If you don't have access to the bonus show, you can get instant access by going to davidpakman.com/membership. You've got a coupon code available. It's iVoted17, gets you a 40% discount off of membership. And please, please, please keep the Patreon pledges coming in. As little as $1 a month, you can pledge at patreon.com/David Pakman Show. That's patreon.com/David Pakman Show. And August 12th, major membership offer going out to everybody who's subscribed to our newsletter. You can sign up for that on our website, davidpakman.com.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.